So this is the Dark Ages, and we're starting off in about 490 AD. So the reason the period is sometimes called dark is that it represented for much of Europe a giant step backwards in terms of overall quality of life. Under Roman rule, Europe had been stable, it had been united, and except for wars that were mostly going on in faraway places like England or Germany, the edges of the empire, it was pretty peaceful. There's this long period of peace called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. And now it was fragmented and extremely violent because you had these Germanic tribes carving out their territories in various parts of Europe, which meant a lot of fighting back and forth between these different warlords. And then you had these fierce Vikings from Norway coming down to raid their neighbors. So if you picture your sort of typical movie version of a Viking raid, that's kind of what it was like all over Europe for a few hundred years after the fall of the Roman Empire, the Western half. So during this time, all the technology, all of the systems of government, the roads, the aqueducts, all the knowledge of science and math and astronomy, all that stuff that had existed under Rome, mostly was forgotten. It would be kind of like if 300 years from now, all the stuff that we can do with computers today, all of the information that's stored on the internet was just gone, and nobody knew how to get it back, or maybe even remember that it existed. So, like I said, a giant step backwards for most of Europe, and certainly for most of the people who had lived in Europe under the Roman Empire and their children, their children's children. Quality of life declined significantly. But we're going to zoom ahead to the 600s and 700s, because what was a dark age for the former Roman Empire was kind of a golden age for this other group, the Muslims. So the story of the Muslims and of Islam, their religion, is very similar to the story of Christianity in a lot of ways. They both came from the same area near modern-day Israel, what they both, as well as the Jews, considered the Holy Land. Both of them were based around the teachings of a prophet and the belief in monotheism. That's the idea that there's just one all-powerful God. And both of them became religions based around teachings that were collected in a holy book, the Bible and the Quran. So there are all these parallels. And Islam, which starts a little later, really kind of comes into full swing in the 600s and 700s after the death of Muhammad. And during this time, Muslim armies conquer much of the Byzantine Empire, which had conquered them and kind of oppressed them, including the Holy Land near the city of Jerusalem. And they also conquered most of northern Africa, pretty much all of Spain, where they're going to remain in power for the next 300 years. And this is really important because under Islamic rule, Spain becomes kind of like what Rome used to be, the center of everything, of culture, of art, architecture, music, literature, science, math. And this is at a time when the rest of Europe is pretty much illiterate, except for the monks and the priests, and is mostly preoccupied with war and basic survival. So the Moors, which are what the Muslim conquerors were called by their enemies, the Christians, while they're in Spain, build these amazing buildings with these insane mathematical, intricate patterns that are still around today, like the Alhambra. They wrote poetry and stories that are still around today, like this one. They invented banks. They pretty much invented modern medicine, including like the idea of a trauma, emergency room and a treatment for cataracts of the eyes. And they invented algebra, without which neither Mrs. Drown or the iPhone would exist. So jumping ahead to 755, kind of this period, 755 to 840. So, meanwhile in France, the king of the Franks, who are the Germanic tribe who have conquered what is now France, is this guy named Charles, more commonly and famously known as Charlemagne, Charles the Big, or Charles the Great. And Charlemagne is gaining power by conquering all of his less powerful neighbors and kind of being powerful enough to keep the Moors from spreading in from Spain, in from the west, and fending off the Vikings from the north. And then he gets even more powerful when he takes his armies south to Italy and helps the Pope kick the Lombards, another tribe, out of his section of Italy. And in return, he kind of gets the endorsement of the Pope as, like, the king, the good guy. And since at this time, pretty much all Christians believe that the Pope was literally speaking for God, getting the endorsement of the Pope is a pretty strong endorsement. So in the year 800, Charlemagne is crowned the Holy Roman Emperor, which is the Holy Roman Empire is kind of this alliance between the Pope, who has all of the religious power, right? He's the one who can tell people they're going to hell, and the King of the Franks, Charlemagne, who has all of the military power. And when Charlemagne is crowned, he proceeds to rule over the largest and most peaceful kingdom since the Romans. It's pretty much the high point, stability-wise, of the Dark Ages. And it's also about as good as it's going to get for another 600 years in terms of stability. So, after the death of Charlemagne, his only son, Louis, rules for a while. And when Louis dies, the kingdom gets split up into three parts. East Francia, which is what we would now call modern Germany. West Francia, which is modern France. And the Central Realm, which is kind of the skinny guy from modern Belgium and the Netherlands and down to Switzerland and Italy. And during this period, there's just a lot of fighting. It doesn't work. This kingdom gets split up. The brothers start fighting. They do a little collaborative work to start to drive the Moors out of Spain, but then they go back to fighting because they're just struggling for power and land. And as time goes on, it just gets worse and worse. The kings keep dying, having multiple sons, splitting up their kingdoms. So it just fragments. So you've just got a lot of little warlords and then the people who are trying to scratch out a living around them. So basically, for the vast majority of people in Europe, it sucks to be alive during this time because you're just surrounded constantly by war and chaos, and there's always one group fighting another group for control over the area, and you're pretty much just happy to support whichever warlord seems like they're the most likely to protect you and keep the Vikings or the Magyars or the Moors or the Lombards or each other from burning down your house and destroying your crops so you can feed your family. And so once again, because of this desperation and chaos, people embrace a new system. And even though it's a system that's totally unfair and dehumanizing to most of the people, they go along with it because it creates some measure of stability. And this system is called the feudal system, which kind of characterizes the medieval period, which we're moving into, and which we'll talk about next time.